Greetings, kinsmen. Now that our tent is up and it's standing on its own, it's time to put the canvas on. So I very simply just stapled the canvas to the frame and stretched it out across to get the right length. And now that I have it set up, here we go. So I'm using the frame as a guide to make sure I got a nice straight cut. If there's any gaps in between the canvas and the frame, that might let airflow and moisture come into the tent. Don't want that. In order to keep it up on the frame, I had to staple it in place here right on the door and up against all of the slat wall. We can all use some encouragement from time to time, so do me a favor, go into the comments and give me some love. Give me a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe and share my stuff. I really would like this channel to grow, and only you guys can do that. Thanks. By the way, this held together really well. Nice and tight, no sags, no holes to let air and water in. I was really satisfied with it. The only drawback to using those was that it kind of pulled and tore away at the canvas, so it wasn't ideal. So of course my solution was to stitch some ties into the canvas so I can tie it directly to the frame. I'm using some heavy grade leather thread. It's not made of leather, but it's made for leather. And of course that's just regular old 1/4 inch jute rope. No, my mistake. It's a sizzle rope. You get it in like 20, 50, and 100 foot lengths. I ultimately put about 4 of these across the entire wall, and I think more would have been better, but it's just more time to tie up stuff, and it wasn't ideal, but again, it worked. Now that I have the wall canvas up, it's time to make an eye splice for the belly band. This is what's going to keep the roof and the wall together as all the downward pressure pushes against the wall. This keeps it nice and tight. You'll see later on in the video just how well this works. In a previous video we did do a bitter end splice, and this is very similar except I don't crown it, just splice it back in. And of course there's better people out there that can show you how to make an eye splice, and I'm just not very good at it, and I don't have a very good camera angle to show you. Maybe in a future video though. Now that we have our eye splice, it's time to trim off the excess and melt it together with our lighter here. This is to keep the threads from unraveling and fraying. Now that we have that set up, we're going to keep it nice and tight by binding it with that same heavy duty thread. The first step with that is to tie it to just one of the threads and then just wrap it around and make sure it's nice and snug so it doesn't slip. When you're binding this up and wrapping it up with that heavy duty thread, lay the threads right next to each other. Don't overlap. It'll just look bad, and you'll have some bits that are looser than others, and you'll have some threads sticking out. You just look ugly. And of course when you're done, you want to melt it together with your lighter there. Now that we have our belly band ready, we're going to stretch it across and get our proper length before we cut it. Here we are again showing my inexperience on how to put this whole thing together. I think the easiest way that I found to do this is to set one of the ropes on the frame slat wall and then tighten it up. Everything would have been kept up high and nice and tight. Otherwise, this is going to happen. It just does not look good, doesn't stay up high. There we go. right on top of the door frame, and then walk it around, tighten it up. This reminds me, we are our own worst critic. And so whenever you try something new, you got to cut yourself some slack and start talking about all the good things that you've done right. And it's okay to look back on the things that you haven't done right and honestly say, I could have done that better. But don't get on yourself too much, because that can really pile up on you and make you feel depressed. This is the reason why I like that eye splice. This is called a trucker's hitch. I can put the line right through that eye and cinch it down really tight, and it stays tight. And once you have it tight, you put in a little slip knot like we showed in the earlier episodes, and it'll stay tight. And you can put several of those in a row, and it won't bind up on you. All you got to do is just pull that bitter end, and it comes undone. Easy peasy. Once the roof is put on, that rope will definitely have enough friction to keep it up. Now that the wall is done, time to move on to the roof. My original plan was to make them in 8 separate panels, and I wanted the seams to go down the roof, not across it. It's hard to explain, but I didn't want the seams to catch any of the rain and have it leak inside the tent. So the only way I could have done that was to make it kind of like an umbrella. Like if you look at the fabric of an umbrella, all of the seams run downwards. They don't run across. And that's exactly my plan. So I had to make some trapezoid-like shapes and then sew them all together. Here I am fumbling around trying to figure out how to draw this on canvas. I'm using the 2x4 for a nice straight edge because clearly a tape measure isn't cutting it. You'll notice that paper that I'm looking at, that's my blueprint for what size, shape, and whatnot, just trying to make sure that I do it right. I don't have much canvas to make mistakes with. I wanted to make sure that I didn't cut twice and measure once, or measure once and cut twice. I wanted to check and double check and triple check just to make sure that I had it in the right shape. And if you're doing this, it's always good to err on the side of making it just a bit too big than too small, because if it's too small, it just ain't gonna fit. If it's too big, oh well, you have a little bit of wrinkling or folding or draping, and that's not a big deal at all. It's a good thing that you double and triple check your measurements, because I caught a mistake right here. And now I'm going to have to redraw that line, because it definitely looked lopsided. This is going to be the pattern piece of which all the other trapezoids of the panels are going to be stretched out, or sketched out. Stretched out? By the way, I sketched this all out with a pencil, and the reason why is because the graphite tends to wash out much more easily than ink. You'll notice that I don't have any shoes on. The reason why is because I'll be stepping across that and dragging my feet across the canvas. I don't want any scuff marks or dirt. I want to keep this as clean, as pristine as possible, as it will gather all sorts of stains and dirt and grime over the years. This was probably the easiest and most relaxing part of the gig. It just was. It was just simple, wasn't physically hard, and it really started to reveal the finality of the project. Once we have our first piece, we're going to flip it over, and we're going to trace out our next piece. Make sure that you line up your corners just right. Otherwise, you're going to have just an off looking trapezoid. You're not going to have the same measurements. And I tried to sketch, dude. Sketch it over the fabric, but it wasn't doing it. So I used the 2x4 here, and then I just cut it out. And of course, I didn't want to cut it with that pattern right next to it. Otherwise, I'm going to cut that, and that's my pattern piece. I don't want to cut into that. Just to backtrack a little bit, let you guys know how I came up with my measurements and my shapes. I took the circumference of the roof ring and of the wall. So that shorter top piece, that's going to go around the roof ring, and the bottom piece is going to go around the wall. Since I had 8 panels and I wanted a 1-inch seam on each panel, I took that number and I added, for every panel I added 2 inches. So I multiplied that by 8. That gave me 16 inches. I added that entire dimension to the circumference of the top and the bottom, and then overall I divided that number by 8, and I got both the top and the bottom lengths for that trapezoid. I'm not a math magician, but I think you get what I'm trying to say here. I've seen other methods that probably took less work and are a bit simpler, but I think this is the best method for keeping water out of your tent. And if you're anything like me, or other humans really, you don't like getting woken up in the middle of the night having water drip on you and on your sleeping bag and your cot and all that. Just a recipe for a miserable event. Now that you have all of your panels cut out, time to stitch them all together. You're going to line up your edges and pin them together. As you guys remember, we have a 1-inch seam. Initially I did a straight stitch, and oh yeah, real quick, do a back tack like that. Back tack is where you stitch forward a few stitches and then you reverse it and go back again. Also, be sure to remove your pins before it goes through the needle, otherwise the needle can strike that pin and you'll break your sewing needle and you have to replace it. It takes time, and if you don't have any replacements, then you got to go to the store and get some more, and it's just a huge hassle. So it's a quick, easy little thing to keep from busting up your needles. I'm trying to adjust here how to change it over to a cross stitch. I don't know this machine, and I don't know how to sew, as it clearly shows, and I'm just trying to figure it out, fumbling around. Again, remove your pins just before they go under. Otherwise, you're going to bust your needles. Again, super relaxing, easy to do, and just one of my favorite parts about this whole build. Once we have our first stitch done, we're going to flip it over with the seam side up, fold it over, and pin it into place and stitch it again with a straight stitch. For those that do know how to sew, leave a comment down below if there's any tips or tricks that might be helpful to me, so next time it won't be so hard, or it'll be more secure. Thanks. Speaking of next time, I'm thinking about making a marquee tent or a Roman style tent. Let me know if I should do that kind of build down below in the comments. Along that same thread, I'm thinking about making it a giveaway after 300 subscribers. Definitely let me know your thoughts on that. Now, as you can tell, when you're doing this part, it's going to start bunching up on you pretty bad. You got to stuff it through that hole, and otherwise you're going to start stitching over all of that, and then you're gonna have to undo it and then restitch it, and again, wasting time and effort. But once you close this whole thing up, that's where it's really gonna bind up on you, so be prepared for that. checking out that seam, and it looks really good. I'm satisfied. Good to go. Then you move on to the next panel and do the same exact thing. Once you have all 8 panels put together, you want to close up that cone or that circle and do the same thing there, and that's where you're going to have the most difficulty. So have patience with yourself, take your time, do it right. Now that everything is sewed together, you can see it's kind of a cone shape, and I'm making sure that the seam threads, things, fabric doesn't come unraveled and frayed, and it just this is an experiment and it actually worked. I think it works really well. It's quick, it's easy, and I just had to let it sit for a couple of hours and it was good to go. Once my glue was laid down, I smeared it and smoothed it out with my finger, make sure that it got into the fibers, and did exactly what it was meant to do. Now that I think of it, it also helps seal up that seam to keep water from seeping in. Also, keep in mind that this is Titebond 3 waterproof glue. So for those of you who's like, yeah, but it's glue, and once it hits water, it's gonna reactivate. Not this stuff. You have to saturate it for days in order to reactivate it. So this is my go-to glue for anything that has to do with cabinetry, furniture making, or anything with wood. I love it. Quick note, this little square piece is the top flap that goes over the roof ring to keep water from coming in through that center ring. I'm going to sew that to the top of the canvas when I'm ready. Now that the glue is dry, time to throw it on top, see how it fits. And I'm not tall enough to reach an 8-foot center ring, so I used one of the spare rafters that I had made to poke it and pull it over the top of that center ring. And this is where a ladder would be really helpful, as I can just climb up the ladder and pull it by hand, and it would be a lot easier than just a stick. But if you don't have a ladder, a stick will work. There's something just so satisfying and complete when you get all the canvas on top and it just fits and snug. It's like making a bed first thing in the morning. It's going to take a bit of effort to get that canvas to slip over the top of the ring. Not sure if it really matters, but at the time it mattered to me. Every weekend and every hour after work just spent making this happen, and I like it. It's starting to pay off. Now the next episode is to seal it up with some oil, make sure it doesn't leak. If you like this episode, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and click the bell button. Don't be afraid to leave a comment below to share your thoughts, advice, and questions. If this has helped you in any way, buy me a horn of meat on my Ko-Fi or head over to my Patreon. If every sub gives just $1 a month, our projects will become more epic and our stories legendary. I also have my own words, so you can show your love for the channel and look good doing it. But more importantly, be humble, be helpful, and be honorable.